Hi there, and welcome back to the Complete C Sharp Masterclass. In today's module, we'll cover our first introduction to an API and putting everything that we've learned so far together. In this module, we'll really be going over what an API is. We'll have a look at different types of verbs, HTTP verbs. We'll have a look at databases. We'll get an introduction to dependency injection, to services, and so much more. So, before we dive into the code itself, what API is really just a listener and a way to code to data. So it allows us to be able to communicate with external services. API stands for Application Programming Interface. It's really an interface for communicating between different applications. This is how real world applications actually speak to one another, and we can have APIs that deal with different services. Some can speak to other APIs, others can speak to a service or front end. There's so many use cases of what you could use an API for. So the way that you would add an API, if you wanted to see one from scratch, you could just go new project, and then it should be on the list. You can search for ASAP.NET Core Web API. So over here, I've already set one up and I've removed the default stuff. So when it creates a default, you will see it will set up normally a weather application that just generates fake weather data. So for this one, I've removed all of that and I've removed a lot of like the base code. So at the moment, if we just run this, we will see what's in here. So let's start this up, and this should just have two endpoints. The endpoints over here are two controllers, and here we can see it pops up a swagger and it's expecting a string, and then here it's having a query link that expects an input. Now let's go and experiment and look at what this code is actually doing. So here we have a controller that's of type TinyLink controller. Here we have a route. This is the type of route where the item is leading to. So it will always be the name of the route slash API slash name of the controller. So it'll be API slash TinyLink slash the name. So if we look at this, it will always be like the slash API. So it will be the name here, which is this localhost slash API slash TinyLink slash query link with the data that needs to go to it. That's how we'll be able to access some of the things. So with APIs, we've all probably used this all the time without even knowing what it is. So in this module, we'll just see what we can do with it. So firstly, we have a module. Let's just explore the code a bit more. Here we have a database setup with a context. Nothing has been implemented yet. It's just been stubbed out. We have some commands. We have some queries. And we have a service here that's meant to do some stuff, but it's not fully working yet. So we'll implement the entire thing as we go along in this specific service. We have some sort of a hash builder that generates a hash for us. We have app settings on where the database is stored. So for this one, we're just going to be using a small DB, which is a SQLite instance. So for that, if you want to generate a SQLite instance, you can download SQLite. This is in the first module in the tools that you need to download. So if you open this up, just for example's sake, you'll see you can create a new database, open a database. This is just for experimenting, so we'll see how that looks. So let's jump into it. Nothing at this point has really been implemented yet. So let's start with the database. So here we have a database and we have some services, but before we can implement these services, we need to just look at the entities. So here we have a base class entity that has an ID, a created date, a modified date, and whether it's still active or not. And then we have another table that has an ID. Well, we no longer need the ID because this is in the base class. But here we have the original link, and then we have the shortened URL, and then we have the hash, right? So let's see how we can go about doing this. And then we'll also keep track of how we can go about checking each of these specific values. So how many times this specific person has viewed the link, what device they are, and a link to that specific link in the database itself. So we'll see how we can go about implementing this within the code. It's going to be fantastic. Okay, so let's see how we can go about implementing something like this. So now we have the link and we have the pointer to the link. So let's start with the database, right? So yeah, I've prepared a mock version of this. So let's first go and install all the libraries that we're gonna need for this. We're gonna need a few of them. So first we're gonna need entity framework. So entity framework core, this is what we're gonna need to install. And then we're gonna have to install abstractions, relation, and design, and then we'll also install the tools. Let's see. Okay, so that's installed now. Now we'll install the abstractions. Go down with the relation. Then we'll download the design. We need this with the tools. Let's give it a sec. Takes a couple of minutes sometimes. Okay, so that should be installed now. Now this is like normally where we would use SQL Server, but in this instance we're gonna use SQLite. So we'll just install the tools. We need the tools so that we can run commands like adding the migrations and stuff like that. And now we should just be able to install SQLite. Give it a sec, it does take some time sometimes. Okay, I accept. Okay, so now I think we should have everything that we need to implement this. So let's just remove the uncommented out code, and then we're gonna have to include pointers to the language of Microsoft Identity. So now we've included that, and a common practice here is also to add an empty constructor for this as well. More often than not, it does like complaining if there isn't one, so I just usually as a best practice add it in. You don't have to, but in my experience I've run into quite a few troubles by having to do that. So in the tiny link controller I've added some small additions as well, like the get IP client, so get the IP address and the user agent. So we're just gonna first start out by building this in the most basic way and gradually improve the code as we go along. So first things first, right now we have the link, we have the visit, and the database is set up correctly. Now what we need to try and do is just get this to work. So here we need to go and say, okay, tiny link database, and this should just use SQLite. And now let's see if we can go and add this. So we added the connection string, so yeah, we should just be able to say get connection string, default connection. Let's put a breakpoint in here and try and run this and see if it actually picks up the change that we've made. Let's see if this works. So we managed to get the item. This should at this point point to the correct place. Let's see if that works. So it should be able to start up the solution at this point. Okay, great. So at this point, we're still in a good place. We managed to get the connection string and put it in. And again, we'll look at refactoring some of the things. This is just to get the underlying functionality working first, and then we'll look at refactoring. Now, at this point, if we look at just how the service is going to work, we're basically going to have two endpoints. One to create a link, so somebody's going to take a long link that they want to shorten, and they're going to post it to us, and then we're going to shorten that link and save it in the database. And every time when somebody needs to view that link, we're just going to pass it and then record that there's another viewing in the database. Okay, so first things first, let's create the tables for this. So here you're going to go to tools, and then NuGet package manager console, and then we're going to run add migration, and then we're going to give it a migration name. We'll just call it initial, and then we'll give it an output, and we'll put it migrations / SQLite, and that should do the trick. So let's run this and see what it does now. So this should build the item and then it should add our first migration. Could not, oh, that's because it's seeing variables as the startup item when we actually need, where is our app? Tiny link. So let's try this again. So it should create a folder. So now you can see it creates a tiny links folder and visits, and it adds a key and it creates an index on those items. So now we see there's a migration folder added and we added SQLite. This is our first migration. And now in theory, we should be able to add update database, and this should go and script the database. Cool. So now at this point, it's went and it's created the database. So now if we try and go and open this database and just see how the structure of this looks, let's see if we can get straight to this. So you can right click, open file in Explorer, and then that's going to open up the file in the Explorer, and then we can go back to the tool, we can navigate to this, and we can go and see this DB, and we should see one or more tables. So where did this go and update this DB? Or is there another one outside of this? Best practices, tiny link. So which DB did it go and create? This is interesting. So it went and it generated a new DB. Well, let's browse the data, the tables. So at this point, it's not necessarily finding this DB. That either means this is pointing to a completely different DB, or the path that was added. So it should go back 3 times. So from here, it should have been 1, 2, 3, and then it should have referenced tiny link DB. Let's just double check the connection string for this and see if it's exactly the same. So it should have created the tables and set the items up. So we need to just get exactly where this path is. So let's just play around with this for a little while and see the full path of our directory. So if we copy this just like this, nope. So if we pass this in here, we should be able to go and see what the parent directory of this is. So let's give this a try again, and just to see where it stored this. It either created a new instance of that DB. Oh, so this went to the source. Okay, this went one too many. So it should be in here. I see, here we go. So it went a couple of modules way to above. But for now, I think we'll just leave it over there and we'll change this afterwards. It's okay. So then if we go back to best practices, source out of all places, let's see. So here it went and it created these items. So now if we browse data, we should be able to see there's 2 links. There's a link ID here and there's tiny links. So let's go about creating some code to go and add in some links. So first things first, we're going to create a link service, and the link service is over here. And this is just going to take the base property, which is going to be this URL over here because we're using HTTPS, and then we're going to store this as the base URL, and the base URL is going to point to this. And then what we're going to do here, or we can actually just call this whatever, actually it doesn't actually matter. We can just say tiny link, and then we'll leave that as the base URL. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say for the shortened URL, take whatever this tiny link is and get the hash of this, and when we store it, create this tiny link for this and return this link. So then what we're going to do here is we're just going to put in this database in here. So this is the introduction to databases, and this is really just getting it to work. So we'll refactor this later onwards. Another naming convention is when we're passing in a variable, creating private read-only fields, we must specify an underscore when we're adding that in there. So in here, we now should have most of the information that we need. So we should be able to go and say, okay, tiny link service, or new tiny link service, and then we'll just create tiny link. So here we can actually just go and say com, and then inside of the com we can go and so let's see. So what do we actually need in here? We actually just need the URL. So we can take in long or string, or we could leave it like this to take in the command. And then what we can do here is we can basically just go and change this to take in the command, and then add these values in the command. Or we can go and take in a class. We can create a new class and call it create tiny link request, and in this request we are actually just going to move this out. This will come from body, and then we'll leave this in here, but then we'll add in the rest of the things like the when it was created, or not created. We actually need to see what was the other items, like user, like device. So we can say string device so that we can capture where this came from, and then we can go and say public what else, IP address, so string IP address. So that will create those two items. And then what we're going to do here is we're just going to go say, okay, create a new one based on the command. And then here, instead of creating the command, here we're going to put that tiny link, create tiny link request. So then we can just call this R for now, and then later onwards we'll go and fix this. The purpose of this is to see how people would build out a solution starting off really crap, and then we'll gradually improve it once we get it working. So now this should be able to go and say device. We'll pass in the user agent for now as the device. We'll go and pass the IP address, and then we'll just pass in the link. And then at this point we're going to go say tiny links, add the tiny link, and then save the changes. So at this point we should be able to go and create a tiny link. So this will allow us to go and create a tiny link, and then in here we're going to get a link query. So this is when somebody has already added in the link that they want to redirect to. So what we're going to do here is, again, new tiny link service. Let's see what it's going to go and do here. Get original link. So at this point this doesn't really do much, so this is not actually necessary at this point. So we're going to leave this for now, and we'll refactor that later as we go along. So we'll find this. So we'll go first to default, and then we'll just go say x hash equal to q dot. So at this point we'll need to get the hash first from tiny link split. We'll split it at this and then take the last value. That will give us the hash, and then what we can then go and do is say, okay, find us the first item that's here. So this will give us the tiny link. Okay, so this is now when we viewed the specific person to create a tiny link. So let's just peek into here and see what's in the link. We might have to change this around because this is actually coming from somewhere else. We don't actually need any of this to create the link because all that we actually passing into the command is this. So we'll actually need to create a query from this. So we actually need to move this stuff. So really all that we're actually going to need, we'll move this into the tiny link query. And then again, public class, we'll just create another tiny link request. And then we'll basically pass this in here from the tiny link, and we'll pass this from body. So this is a real basic implementation first before we get into like the details of how we can write clean code. So then here at this point, we would actually need to do these checks over here. Okay, and then we no longer need this. We don't need to create the command here either. We could just pass that link over here for now to get the link. And then what we can go and do here is we can say response, install this in the response. And then we can just go say response.entity. That will return the created item. And then from here we're gonna say get the hash of the query that you've given us, and then we're gonna find the tiny link based on the hash. We're gonna get the IP address and we're gonna get the user agent for this, and then we're simply gonna go and say, okay, this person has tried to go and view this, so add a new visit to the database to this URL. And then this visit is basically going to be, I think this will just be called link ID. So at this point, because we have the tiny link, this will link it to that. We'll give it the IP address, and then we'll give it the device. We'll set the device as the user agent for now. And I think that should be the rest of it. And then we'll simply say, so for now, we'll just set that to 1. But what we actually need to do is we have to actually go and say if the tiny link database in the visits, yeah, so this is what we're gonna have to do. So we need to go and check in the visits, is there any visits with this link or this IP address and this device? So let's just push this onto multiple lines and leave this at the end. Is there anyone with this device, and is there anyone with these specific values? Let's just go here. Okay, so then this will be able to tell us now, has there been anyone that has viewed our specific item that we're looking for? And then if there is, then we simply gonna go and say, okay, this is fine. Get the first item that is here. There is an item that exists. And then we're gonna store this because we need to go and save the changes. So var visit. So this will give us the visit. And then we're gonna go say visit plus plus, and then we're gonna go and say visit dot last or modified date will be equal to the date time now, but we always set it to UCT time now so that it's on the generic time frame. Once it's on the generic time frame, we can save the changes, and we can simply just go and redirect to the link. So from here we should be able to just go and redirect. And we'll just redirect to wherever the tiny link original link is. And then we will do the same. So over here, we'll just add in a new instance if it doesn't exist. And then we'll again redirect to the original link. Great. So at this point, we should be able to now create a link, and then we should be able to redirect to a link. So let's see how this works and see if we get any errors from starting this up. For now, we'll just run this and see what it does. For now, let's just continue. So this is normally how most developers start out. They just sort of build just for the sake of building. And we'll have a look at what we can do to make this a little bit easier. We're gonna have to remove this. Again, this has to come from the query, so let's just change that quickly. Let's see, dynamic controller. This no longer needs to go and do this. This is gonna come from query, and we're gonna just put this in here. We're gonna change this into this. It's gonna get the tiny link, and for now, we'll simply just leave it as is. And then we'll create services that does this to make it a lot cleaner. And let's see how this works. So this is a service that's often used in most of the specific social media such as LinkedIn and so forth for shortening a URL. So let's see how this works in action. So here we can just maybe go and Google something like C#, and we'll go and find a really long link for C# or C# tutorials. So here's like a super long link. So now we can simply just go and copy this link, and we should be able to say, hey, can you please turn this into a shorter version of this link? Then what's going to happen is once we hit this endpoint, so we're going to go and say put a breakpoint in here, and then let's see what it actually does. So it's hit our breakpoint, and now we're going to step into this. We have this tiny link, and then let's see what it's going to do if we step into this again. Visual Studio is a little bit slower than normal today. So now we have a short version of a hash, which is basically like the key that we're going to use to check up each item, and each hash is always going to be unique. So that's perfect. So then we're going to take that hash and we're going to create a short version of this specific URL. So what's going to happen is over here, this is the original URL, this is the shortened version of it, this is the hash, it's not deactivated. This is when it was created, modified, and the key. And then this is going to create the link, and then that link is going to be added to the DB. And then we're going to add that to the link to the DB, and then we're going to save the change to the database, and then we're going to return the entity. So at this point, we've done the first part where we went and created a link, and this link is now saved in the database. So let's see how that looks now. So now we should be able to just go and just open this database again. See how it goes. So we have our first record in here with this ID, the original URL, the shortened URL, the hash, and so forth. So now let's see how this would work if we need to do a lookup for the specific URL. So we can go and use the short URL, and then we should just be able to pass this in here. And then we're going to get an endpoint, and let's go and see if we can redirect to this URL. So we'll hit this endpoint. Again, we'll split and we'll get the hash. And then we're going to find the first value for this tiny link, and that's going to look up that item based on the hash. We're going to get the IP address, we're going to get the user agent, and then we'll see these values, and then we'll see are there any. At this point, there are none in the database yet, so there's no visits. So we add in our first visit with all the linking items that we need. We might have missed a few, but let's just see if there is anything else in here. I think we're okay. We added the IP address and the device and the account and the link ID. So this should now link it to that item, and then we should just be able to redirect. So yeah, this is meant to do a redirect to that specific item. So if we had to go and put this in a URL, we should now just be able to continue, and we see the redirect actually happening. Now what happens here is we should now be able to go and view the visits and say, okay, let's open this database again and see what has happened. And we should now be able to save as, oh, we didn't save changes. Okay, so that's fine. So here we need to add, and then we need to say tiny link. So save changes. So we forgot to add the save changes. So let's see if we can perform a hot reload here and see if it actually picks up this change now. So let's try this again. We'll try out tiny link again. Seeing as we already have this in the database, we should just be able to go to tiny links, and then we are going to go and get the shortened URL, and we should just be able to paste it in. And then this should now do the rest of what it needs to do. It's going to add the changes to the database, save the changes, and redirect, or at least it's meant to. But because the setup on this doesn't allow redirect, but if we look at the database itself on visits, there should now be a new entry. So we can see, hey, there's a new entry in the visits. Somebody tried to visit this from this device. This is the IP address. This is the link that it's attached to. And this is how many times they tried to visit it. So let's try and copy and paste this request URL into a new URL now. And then we can now just remove the breakpoints, and let's see what that does. So again, it redirects to that URL, but now we should be able to go and say, hey, how many visits are there? So if we refresh this a couple of times, if we close this link, and then we go and say, hey, let's have a look at this URL again, we should be able to see in the database now the number of views should have increased on this again. So if we change this to link, the count becomes 3. So this is really one of the cooler projects. It's really awesome to learn how to build a simple service like this, and we can connect the front end to this. For now, the scope of this will be out, but let's just see it how we can take the same solution now and just make it so much better and refactor it. So here we have a lot of code in the controller. We're using the database directly, and it just looks very terrible, but it works. So let's see in the next video on how we can go about making this cleaner and easier to understand using repositories and services, and an introduction to dependency injection.